video guy again. Anyway, yeah, same old routine. Okay, so now he's saying that the Benatar argument cuts off what he calls the top of this graph. Yeah, I guess we could find the whole graph. There it is. That it cuts off this joy, happiness, enthusiasm, pleasure. So these are the things that are of value that the human race creates in the universe that are so valuable that they overwhelm the value weight of the despair, the pain, the harm, and the suffering. So we are somehow running a net profit, and so much so that it would be a cheat to sit there and say that this is more weighty. And his argument is that Benatar isn't accounting for this somehow. All right. So anyway, let's explain asymmetry. I mean, I really hate to have to go there again. But no, the argument's more about necessity. That's sort of what that's what creates the asymmetry, is the fact that none of it is necessary. So when you have a circumstance where something's created and you're valuing it, if there is no necessity, there's no function to the thing, it becomes almost impossible to place value on it. You'd say, why would you do it at all if it had any associated risk? So if the risk of harm exists and the thing has no fundamental function, it's already doomed to failure because you're going to judge it by a different standard. It's only things that are necessary, that serve some purpose, would you accept an associated risk. So if you had two things, let's just say watches, you had two clocks, and both of them told time, you have a redundancy. One's necessary and one's not necessary. And let's say one creates this negative effect where it requires fueling. It requires that you have to pay money to run it. It seems the equation is obvious. You say, well, you go with the one that doesn't cost anything. Okay, because it's necessary, you have to have one of them, but certainly you don't have to have the one that costs something. So, I mean, I could say that clock runs on an A battery, and, it'll go months, 6 months, 8 months, 10 months on a AA battery. I could have another clock that costs me $1 a day to run. So obviously I'd get rid of the $1 a day clock. And that's the fundamental nature of this argument, is that we have a clock that isn't a clock. We have something in our house that's consuming harm. And yes, although the pleasure stuff is all very nice, it isn't necessary unless you create the clock. So it only, let's say it produces some kind of food value or some kind of thing, and it eats it, and that's it. It only satisfies its own circumstance. It doesn't do anything else. It doesn't function in any other way. It just consumes its own, it only consumes to its own needs. And that's the function of living things. They create a need problem in need of resolution. The resolution of the problem is this joy, happiness, blah, blah, blah. But it has no value that can extend beyond its existence. So like the non-existent Martians and like the non-existent Plutonians and Venetians and Saturnites, all those things don't have any utility. Their absence is not in any way a deprivation to the universe, and even to us as intelligences. We have to strangle our intelligence to try to imagine them, and then imagine them having some necessary purpose or function or existence. We don't just innately say, I don't think anybody does, feel any grief, like, oh, they don't exist. Like the idea that these people are projecting that there's some sort of loss or absence, that we're going to have, there'll be no joy, pleasure, all these things will be gone. And they're just imagining the people existing and then being deprived of the joy, instead of imagining the fact that they don't exist. There's no need for them, there's no function for them. And then you can appreciate just how strong this is as a waste. This becomes just wasted because you're not producing anything that was necessary to be produced. It only has value if you force the existence of the thing. So this stuff only has value if you are forced to have the clock. Yeah, I think that does it. So anyway, we'll play this nonsense. But this is such a cheat of his argument. It's such he's just a propagandist and a purveyor of ignorance. I mean, just a promoter of ignorance. And I mean, you can only call it what it is. It's a slander. I think he's smart enough to do better than this, to understand the argument better than this, and describe the argument better than this, more honestly than this. And then to accuse somebody else of being dishonest and making a dishonest argument just makes him despicable. Really. What a horrid character. Yeah, he really is horrid.
You know, the old and somewhat politically incorrect question now that's kind of a joke about an impossible question. This is up there with, have you stopped beating your wife yet? It looks incontrovertible, doesn't it? But that's only because of the way that it's phrased, that the whole thing is framed. This is a measure of harm.
Well, again, it's a whole book. I have it right here. But and it's just a lie to say that he doesn't account for it. He does account for it, but the accounting is in the simple statement, okay, that you can't deprivate the non-existent. Okay, they can't need that function. They don't need the function of joy, happiness, whatever the top of that thing was.
Okay, all you're doing is you are measuring harm. You're setting the stage for a situation in which it looks as though life is inherently negative.
Yeah, well, I'll see it again, but the point is that when you're measuring something's performance, its function, its purpose, its utility is a fundamental element of that measure of value. You will accept liability. If nuclear power plants have this huge negative downside risk, despair, suffering, harm, all that stuff is the risk of nuclear power. And the reason why it can be justified at all is because what it produces is necessary. Okay, the human animal will need energy, and it needs a lot of it. And so the necessity can make this thing meaningful, can make this thing valuable. But without necessity, if it was just a machine and it ran and it produced a risk of harm, everybody would say, don't make the machine. It doesn't serve any function. So again, just like the Martians, we don't serve a function external to our own needs. That's the dilemma. That creates the opportunity for the asymmetry.
Because of what you have set out to measure. This top of the graph is deliberately excluded.
Well, like I said, it's not deliberately excluded. That's a lie. It's quite plainly explained that without you can create a good value always by eliminating these things. It's always good to mitigate against despair, pain, harm, suffering. It is not always good to provide opportunity for joy, happiness, enthusiasm, and pleasure. That's just the way it is. It's just the way it works out as a practical fact. Okay, because these things can only be needed by something that can be put in a negative state. Something in a not negative state does not need these things. Only something in a negative state needs to be joyed, happiness, enthusiasm, and pleasured. And that's just a practical circumstance. And when applied to our psychology, which Benatar doesn't do, but I think it can be done, we can understand how the mechanism does work. Because we have words in our vocabulary, you might have heard of them. Words like addiction. They were invented to describe a phenomenon of human psychology. And that is what drives us to these things.
maybe it wasn't deliberately excluded. Maybe Benatar simply wasn't thinking. I don't know.
Yeah, well, again, that's just a disgusting cheap shot. You know, I mean, I wish Benatar would make more public appearances, but I mean, gee, I mean, you know, he should he should pull his glove off and slap you in the face and say, back that up, fucking cunt.
Why did he leave this part off the graph? That I don't understand.
Well, again, your graph is a lie. He didn't make any such graph, and he didn't leave it out of the argument. He explained how this is unnecessary, and this is unnecessary. That this is unnecessary. Therefore, you can't justify the negative. The risk is idiotic, because it's all in an environment where there is no function.
The only thing I can conclude is maybe he sincerely believes that this doesn't exist, which is, again,
Well, again, that would be directly contradicting what he wrote in this book, which you obviously haven't read, and which you obviously don't care about slandering and lying about. So you're just a despicable liar now, you know, that's all. So join the ranks of the rest of the anti-natalist, anti-natalist, and resort to being a liar. So, bravo, you're a liar now.
we're going back to the anhedonia thing, where the person actually believes that this doesn't exist, that this is a delusion. So we might as well just leave this out, just to be completely honest with ourselves.
Well, again, it is it is reasonable theory of psychology that much of this is an illusion. Much of this is just escaping from some form of this. Okay, you're in a negative state, you move to a more positive, a less negative state, and that appears to be a positive state. Yes, you get out of jail and you say, I'm free. And that feeling is really good, but it's good why? Oh, that's right, because you were in fucking jail.
Sorry, it doesn't work like that. The stuff up here exists and is part of life. It's just as much a part of life as this is.
It doesn't matter whether it's just as much a part of life as that is. Both of these things have no necessary existence. And again, if one has to come with the other, you cannot be deprived of these things if you do not exist. There is no state of deprivation in non-existence. You cannot possibly need these things. And therefore the relief of these things is automatically a good. The non-existence of this is an automatic win. That's the one. And there's a zero here. You can't be denied these things. There is no harm to not having these things. And therefore these things have no meaning or substance or value from the non-start position. From before the starting line, there's no race, there's no rabbit, there's no dogs, there's no nothing. There's no need for the race. And therefore there's no value in starting the race and then accepting the broken legs and the harm and all the other crap that goes with it.
The asymmetry argument is a gigantic fail, and I don't understand why.
Yeah, well, you don't understand because you haven't tried to understand. Like I said, I don't think you've read the book. So this is just a completely dishonest statement of I don't understand. Well, you've completely misparaphrased the argument. You've lied about the argument. And then you're going to say you don't understand the argument. I mean, that's preposterous. Sorry. That's nonsense. You're a dishonest, lying, shit for brains.
Anyone would fall for it. The only thing that I could possibly think of that would justify that is, again, that old insidious question being...
Well, whatever. I mean, this fall for it thing is another kind of a funny line, because I really don't think people could possibly fall for it. I don't think they could be convinced by the argument. I think what the argument does is explain something that people can already sort of sense in their existence. And they say, you know, life does seem kind of foobar. It's just what you live, you die. That ain't too cool. You live to die. You know, you just start dying from the moment you start living. And it has all this, yeah, you care for something and it will be destroyed right in front of your eyes sometimes, in a horrid manner. And, yeah, that just, innately, ooh, that's awful, horribly messy. And Benatar's argument explains why people might sense there's something wrong with this wonderland.
Answered in the usual way, are happy people stupid? Because the only...
Yeah, well, that question I think has already been answered for maybe even thousands of years. I mean, I think the idea of the blissfully ignorant has been around a long, 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 long time.
way to make this graph reasonably switch to this is to assume that happiness does not exist and anyone...
Right. Well, again, that's not what he says in his book. It's not his argument. So again, you're just lying about what his argument is, and that's a bad thing. Being a liar is not very stoic, or it doesn't have any of those values that you might contain in terms of intention. What's your intention? I mean, if you're a liar, are the intentions of liars good? So you're lying for a good reason? You're lying to people for a good reason? Because you think they're smart, and so you need to lie to them to persuade them? Is that what you're doing? Yeah, I don't think so. I just think you're an asshole.
who is actually positively happy is wrong and deluded.
Positively happy, again, is just this, it's a silly question. You ask somebody in the morning, oh, how's your life, and they say, oh yeah, it's been pretty good, oh yeah, I'm doing all right. And then later in the afternoon they have a doctor's appointment and they find out they have pancreatic cancer and they're going to die in 6 months. And then maybe their answer to the question won't be quite the same. And nothing's really changed. They just are now informed of a circumstance of their existence. They could have just gotten a phone call. In the morning everything was fine. In the afternoon they get a phone call that their husband just got killed in an accident at work. And yeah, that maybe their perspective changes. So this happiness thing is kind of, on its face is a trivial way to analyze your existence. My grandmother at 82 years old was already saying, hey, anytime Jesus wants to take me, I'm ready to go. I've sort of had my fill. But she was a happy person. She did her work every day and sewed and did her little thing and tried to help out and all that stuff. And she lived to be 107. All right? I mean, but every year of that, all 30 of those extra years were all just something she had to walk through. She just had no enthusiasm for it. But she wouldn't be called an unhappy person. Silly person.
Well, you can fiddle with graphs however you want. You can fiddle with questions however you want. Just because...
Right, you can try to make rational, logical, you can provide evidence, and you can do, like I said, Benatar doesn't trivialize the subject. He attempts to make the argument from all the angles. He anticipates the counter arguments. He makes a diligent effort to do that, and you want to just call it like he's just doing some silly thing, like he's just baking easy bake oven cupcakes or something. And that's not what he did. And you're a slandering, lying asshole to sit there and critique him and not critique his argument. Fuck you for that.
I ask you, have you stopped beating your wife yet? It doesn't automatically follow that you're an abusive, you're in an abusive relationship.
Yeah, well, again, you just did that, though. I mean, you just mischaracterized who Benatar was. You just said, well, did you write another trivial book? You could do that to him, right? Because you've already you've made the accusation. You've established it as a fact that his book was, underwritten, that his argument was undermade. You didn't establish it as a fact with evidence. You established it as a fact with a lie. So you're guilty of your own crimes.
That you beat your wife. It doesn't work that way.
Well, apparently it works that way when you're doing it, and it doesn't work that way when somebody else is doing it. And the somebody else isn't even doing it, which makes you double wrong, which makes you double evil, which means you probably should have your own fucking candy bar.
It's just gerrymandering. That's just framing the question in such a way as to guarantee the result that you want.
Whatever. Yeah, framing the question. He didn't frame a question, he framed an answer, an explanation. And he provided every frame possible. He anticipated all these arguments, he argued the arguments, and you're slandering his book. You suck, you lying sack of shit.
It's funny that someone with the reputation of Benatar.
I don't know if he had a reputation, I really don't, but it doesn't really matter. The fact is you know nothing of him, you know nothing of his work, you're just a asshole who makes bold and aggressive and sloppy accusations on the internet. So your reputation is now known. Your reliability is now known. You critique books you don't read. Good.
Would use such deliberately faulty logic and
Yeah, deliberately faulty logic. Once again, there's nothing wrong with the logic except the fact that you didn't describe what it is. So again, yes, you're a straw man. Oh yeah, you did that. You straw manned his argument, and that's all you did. I mean, that's one of these things that have been around a long time too. The bliss of ignorance and straw man. I think straw man's probably been around 1,000 years too.
dishonest logic, I would say. But again, it's only dishonest if you actually...
I mean, it's just grotesque that you would call somebody else dishonest after making this slanderous video. It's outrageous that you would call somebody else dishonest. It's outrageous. Outrageous.
If you actually assume that he knows that he's doing this, unless, of course, he honestly believes that joy and happiness and enthusiasm, exultation, and all of that is an actual delusion. That it
Well, calling something a delusion and saying it doesn't exist are not the same thing, okay? So the idea that we are fooled by our sentient self into believing things have value is quite obvious. People eat things called hot dogs, and they're basically full of just ground up shit, including rats and feces and flies. There's all government allowed percentages of all these things. Maggots, there's an allowed percentage of maggot in your hot dog. Now, why do people do that? I guess they have a desire mechanism that makes this hot dog valuable. It wouldn't be valuable by itself. If it was sitting on Mars, it wouldn't have any value, would it? The little piece of maggot stick, the little maggot stick wouldn't have any value over there, would it? No, so I guess it's this thing that we are does create an illusion of value.
actually doesn't exist. And if he does believe that, well, that's my whole point.
Like I said, his book will tell you what he believes if you read it. And so, again, you're just lying about what he says in his book, and then lying about what he speculates or who he is based on the lie of your premise. So that's really, really, really cheap shottery, shithead.
Not actually making an accurate graph of the human condition.
I wonder how many maggots are in your brain. I wonder how many rat tails have been ground up in that spam crap apple. That little scram apple that's in there. Little spam apple. That's all you got for a brain. You're a spammer. You're producing intellectual spam.
Measuring harm is all very well, but it's not the whole picture. I don't care.
And no one was arguing it's the whole picture. The whole picture, though, is that we are a desire machine, a need machine, that we generate the circular logic argument. We generate our own purpose, which isn't good enough. You have to have a purpose that actually exists. You can't generate your own and then consume something of value. That isn't good enough. You have to justify your consumption of harm with something of real value, not value only because you exist.
How much intellectual elbow grease he expends getting to his conclusions.
Yeah, a lot of it, and you don't respect any of it, and that makes you a shithead. Yeah, exactly.
Thank you.
Yeah, well, fuck you, liar. You're just a liar, liar, liar. That's all you are, a little smiling liar. So I guess that'd be your new name, maybe. Lion Andy. Yeah, smiling lion Andy. So you're proud of that? You're proud of being a smiling lion sack of shit. Bravo. But you're right in there with the ranks of the anti-natalists because they all resort to the lies. Lie after lie after lie because they can't make a real argument. So, yeah. So, enough said. Thank you. Goodbye.